Thanks for stopping by at the Life of a Career podcast. We're exploring the life of people and their careers. Even though we are in the digital age, access to careers and career advice from professionals is still very much gated by wealth, status, pedigree, and personal resources. At Mentor Access, we are bringing life to careers and jobs by proliferating access to professionals and mentors for those who may not have personal connections to different industries. Our mission is to open up access to professional stories that might one day inspire children, students, and other job seekers who might otherwise settle for a career path because they weren't privileged enough to know about other opportunities. In today's episode, we are speaking with Mario Roman. He is a project design architect. Thanks again for joining us at the Life of a Career podcast, hosted by Mentor Access. Now let's meet Mario. All right, thanks so much for joining us, Mario. Before we get started, can you give us a quick 90 seconds of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Mario Roman. I am born and raised here in Chicago, and I am an architect. Yeah, we can get a little bit more into specifics of what I do throughout this thing, but yeah.
Cool. Oh, architect. Yeah, we're excited. You're the first architect we've interviewed. So this is going to be interesting. I'm going to be learning the whole way. But
Cool.
before we get to that point, was that something you always wanted to do as a kid?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think as a kid, I never, like weirdly, I never had like that one thing that was like, I want to be this, I want to be that. But I will say that this was probably the first thing that how a lot of people say I want to be this and then they change 17 times until they finally get to college or whatever. For me, I think the moment that I actually decided what I wanted to do, which was probably like early high school, it kind of stayed that way until I went to school. So I never flip-flopped.
When did you, or what made you get interested in architecture or being an architect? Like, how did you first get introduced to it?
Yeah, okay. So I know this sounds kind of cliche, right? But like Chicago is like a city known for its architecture. So I think just being here always like that was always a thing that I was amused about, right? Like growing up as an inner city kid, I didn't go to downtown like regularly, right? Like I would go like a tourist, like I'd go once a year maybe to downtown. But when I did, I was like, wow, you look up and yeah, like I was just like any other person that's not from a big city, and in certain ways. So, just seeing like the super tall buildings and not quite understanding how they were able to stand, things like that. Um, and then also like my affinity for drawing, like I was always into drawing as a kid. Um, I mean, I drew everything like, comics, superheroes. There was a time where like I would draw and design like sneakers, like religiously. Like I had a binder full of like sneakers that I would draw. Maybe I should have gone that route, would have made more money. But yeah, so I was always into drawing. Like I always kind of had like a creative thing. But then when it came to school, like the only subject that I actually liked and most people hated, um, was math. Like for me, math was always like not, yeah, I wouldn't say it was easy up until a certain point, but right, but like when I was in college, but like grammar school, like math came really easy for me, and I liked it. It was like there was a right and a wrong, and I kind of liked it. Um, and yeah, like oddly enough, like architecture, that's what it is. It's like two sides of the brain, like, or it's like your brain. You've got two sides, like the pragmatic side and the creative side. Like that's kind of how architecture is. So I don't know. I guess it just kind of worked out that way. Like the things that I was into growing up, um, it makes sense that I ended up doing this, I guess.
When you were growing up, like in high school and stuff,
Hmm.
did you have conversations with anyone about architecture and this career path? Like, how did you even know it was a career path? I know you saw the buildings, but why didn't you think it was construction versus
That's a
architect?
great
How,
point. A lot of
how
people.
did you know the distinction?
Yeah, that's a great point because a lot of people confuse it, right? Like when you tell them you're an architect, they're like, "Oh, so you build buildings?" I'm like, "No, I don't build them. Like, like I design them." So yeah, that's a good question. Um, so luckily for me, so the high school that I went to Lane Tech, here in Chicago. So when I went to high school, it's a technical high school, so they had a bunch of different programs, like different curriculums that you could take. And one, well, there was one that was called and I'm probably wrong, but it was called something like architecture and engineering or technical something. So the first semester that I was in high school, I took like the general one, like the one that had no specific, um, you know, uh, like field or anything attached to it. It was like I think it was called core. It was like just your general education courses. So I took that, and but like for freshmen, the everybody had to take drafting. Did you guys ever take drafting? Just randomly? No. Okay. So I had
No.
like yeah, so we had to take drafting, which was, like, drawing with like the T square, which is like the long, like straight edge, and like we all had to take it. And I think because it's a technical high school, they just kind of had to put it on everyone's curriculum, right? Like we have to put it, and they've got to at least take one semester of drafting, and just it's really just to kind of like force an introduction to that to students. So again, this is where I talked that like I was kind of weird because it was like I was probably in like the 10% of people who took drafting and actually liked it, right? Like a lot of people hated it. And then it was also like people hated it because they had to walk around with this big T square. I mean, this thing was long. It was like, I don't know, probably like 3, 4 feet long, not 3 feet. And so you couldn't put it in your backpack. So you had to like carry it. And like everyone knew you were a freshman because you had the T square. So I think that's why
I
people,
remember that.
you remember
I
that?
remember that. Yes, and I can sympathize with all those people that hated it because it was one of those things that you didn't know you didn't know anything about, and then you got into this class and they're explaining it, and pretty much like you said, 90% of the people looked around. They're like, "There's no way
Yeah.
we're gonna like make it through this class."
Yeah, I mean, it was like super basic stuff. Like they taught you how to use a pencil. Like it was like you were in kindergarten in a way. Like how to write letters. Yeah, that sense was actually like kindergarten. Like they'd give you a paper with like the lines on it, and like a few like pre-written or pre-typed letters, and you had to trace them because you needed to learn how to write in an architectural style. Again, this is all like I mean, I was a freshman in high school like in 2002. So it was a while back, right? So it was like there was still some manual drafting, right? Like manual drawing. So we all had to take the manual stuff first. Um, this is probably really boring to a lot of students, so I it probably sounds boring, but but it was, yeah, that's kind of how I started, and I liked it, so after that, after taking that class, I switched my curriculum to the architecture and engineering technical curriculum. So it was, again, it was like a forced introduction to drafting and architecture in its like most basic form, but it definitely opened my eyes. Like, oh, this is cool. I actually enjoy this.
Yeah, and it's okay. Like the boring side, the purpose of this is basically, hey, someone might actually watch this and go, "Oh, I relate to Mario. I've
Yeah.
always been this kid who didn't belong to everyone else." Like Dan and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't. I'm glad I never took drafting because I'm pretty sure I would not have enjoyed it myself. I'm just
You would have hated it. Yeah.
yeah, I kind of feel left out that I haven't had the experience because I was a little surprised that Dan had it as well. Like, but someone else might be, relate to that. So that's cool. Like, and then it was sort of just a direct path. Like, did you ever talk to your parents about it? Did you talk to anyone else in your community?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, I did tell my parents, right? Like, obviously, as soon as, I was taking this class, and especially when I made the transition to that curriculum, I was like, oh, I really like this. And then I obviously did a little bit of research on it, and it's like this new curriculum. It's like, geared towards that. Like, basically for the rest of my high school years, it's kind of like, like in college, like you just kind of upgrade to the next level of that class, and it was multiple classes. It was like hand drafting, and then there was computer drafting, and then eventually, like as the years went on, it went, geared more into like, putting those skills that you learned of just drafting and putting them into practice by actually designing and drawing stuff. So, yeah, so I told my parents, and I didn't think about it too much at the time, especially like freshman and sophomore year about like college and becoming an architect because like sadly in my community, like, and I guess when I say community, I'm saying like from like a cultural standpoint and being like an inner city kid, like it wasn't, I didn't know many people that had gone to college, you know what I mean? Like for me, I was in high school and like I was at a decent high school and I was pretty smart, but like I never thought that I could actually do something like going to college. Like I didn't even quite understand the concept. You know what I mean? So in my mind, I was just like, let me just do what I enjoy in high school. Like I'm enjoying this drafting stuff, so let me just do that. And it wasn't until like junior year in high school where I was like, okay, like maybe I can try to do this college thing. Like I still wasn't sure what it entailed or how possible it was for someone like me to do it. Like, it was just a lot of unknowns at that time, but I just kind of kept going with it.
Were there not any like school counselors or guidance counselors maybe at that time that could have talked to you about it? Because wasn't that their role? I think we have very different experiences because in my school it was all about going to college. That's so interesting that yours, you didn't have that structure or framework.
Yeah, no, and yeah, let me clarify. Like in high school, it definitely was like they definitely had those resources, but I'm talking about like where I came from, right? Like for me, going to Lane Tech was like a huge slap in the face in a good way. Like it was like just seeing like a whole new world, like where I grew up, it was just like a lot of Hispanic people and African American people, and like I didn't really know anything else outside of like that, like my neighborhood, you know. So I didn't even think about that stuff. I didn't think to go to counselors and ask them these things. Like I said, it wasn't until yeah, like later on, like junior year, when I actually started thinking about it in a more serious manner that I kind of started talking to people about that. And like my own drafting teachers and stuff like that, they would kind of talk to me about that as well.
Did you have like friends that talked about what they wanted to do in the future? Um, or was that not really a discussion that was done when you
Oh,
were a kid?
you're talking about like in high school?
Yeah.
A little bit. I mean, I was also like an athlete in high school. Like I played soccer, so like a lot of my friends were soccer players, and all we would talk about was soccer and sports and and girls and stuff. So it wasn't like a lot. Like it was that like nobody wanted to be like the nerdy guy to start talking about like professional school stuff. Like I don't know, maybe it was just like a subconscious thing. But I didn't talk to my friends too much about that kind of stuff. But we did a little bit, especially like the ones that you knew were kind of like you and were like actually into their school and their grades. So we would kind of talk about that a little bit. But a lot of them at the time didn't have an idea of what they wanted to do. So it was a lot of like, oh, I don't know, I'll go to college and we'll see what I like.
So how did you end up then applying to schools? Like, did you have to learn that on your own to just like go to their websites and figure things out?
So oh man, so this part's good. So I actually didn't go to college right after high school. So I had like a lot of personal stuff going on at the time with like my family situation. Um, so like my parents had just gotten divorced, like my junior year, I think it was. So like I don't know, there was a lot of stuff going on, right? So when like senior year, and mind you, I graduated with like a 3.6 GPA. I mean, it wasn't like mind blowing, but it was a pretty good GPA, right? But I don't know, man. I don't know if it was like if I was affected by like my personal stuff outside of school, um, or if it was also just like I don't know, I didn't want to go through with it at the time. I don't know what it was, but I actually didn't even apply to colleges or anything, which trust me, like I regretted later on because not only did it set me back time wise, like, it set me back a few years, but also from a financial standpoint because so whatever, right? Like I graduated from high school and I hadn't applied to any colleges or anything. At the time, I remember I was working part-time at a CVS pharmacy downtown. And so when I graduated high school, I kept working at CVS, but I like went to full time. And sure enough, man, like a few months into it, I was like, "What the hell am I doing?" I can't work at a CVS for the rest of my life. And if someone out there works for CVS, like it's nothing against it, but I was just like, like I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, right? Like I don't want to be stocking shelves and like ringing people out. So, yeah, I eventually started looking into it, and like a year later, so again, all this, like all these wasted opportunities for like scholarships and resources and things like that, like I lost a lot of that for just taking 1 year off. And then it was like a year later, I was like, all right, I want to go to school, but like I didn't apply to anything, right? Like after high school. So now, like, what do I do? So obviously there's different routes that people can take in that sense. So what I did was I went to City Colleges of Chicago, community college, right? So I signed up for Wright College, and I started, I mean, yeah, like square one. Like I started at Wright College, and I wasn't even doing that full time either because I was still working. Um, so I did Wright College, man. I probably did like 2.5 years at Wright College and got my associates. Um, but with your associates, like in architecture, you can do absolutely nothing, right? It was just like I got my associates from Wright College, and um, what it did do though was it allowed me to apply to universities, or our universities with architecture degrees, um, that and because of like my good grades and my just like my good standing at Wright College, um, I was able to do like a transfer. I come into one of these universities as a transfer student. So I remember at the time, I applied at UIC, and I applied at a couple of other schools. One of them was Illinois Institute of Technology, better known as IIT or Illinois Tech, which is where I ended up going. Um, but like IIT was, and actually before I keep going, let me clarify. IIT is not ITT Tech. Do you guys remember those commercials for ITT Tech? Um,
Yeah, IIT is actually very not. I don't know if it's prestigious, but it is much more
for
like
sure, yeah.
it's an actual like technical school, university, 4 year university. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like in the Midwest, like it's got one of, definitely like in the Chicagoland area, like without going too far out, it's a good school. It's good, good, specifically for like architecture and engineering. Um, but anyway, I just wanted to clarify that because a lot of people say, "Oh, you went to ITT Tech? Yeah, I've seen the commercials." I'm like, "No, that's not the one." Um, but actually, yeah, I always tell people like it's the one across the highway from White Sox Park. I don't know what to call it anymore, Dan. I know you're a White Sox fan, but it's switched a bunch of names a bunch of times. So
Kaminsky.
yeah, I just call
Yeah,
it Comiskey, right?
just call it Comiskey or White Sox Park is fine. We don't need it.
Yeah.
We don't need to do all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's right across the highway from it. But anyway, so jumping back into the story, I applied at IIT, but it was significantly more expensive, like probably twice as expensive as UIC was. So in my mind, I was like, best case scenario, I go to UIC and whatever, I get it done. But yeah, it was like one of the counselors at Wright College, at community college, that said, why don't you apply to a couple of other schools in case you don't get accepted to UIC or whatever the case may be. I was like, okay. So I ended up applying to IIT, just, like whatever. Like I didn't expect anything to come out of it. I was like, even if I get accepted to IIT, like there's no way I can afford it. Because again, like and just to kind of backtrack a little bit, like my parents didn't have like a college savings fund for me, right? Like it was just me and whatever I could figure out. Like I had to figure out how I was going to pay for school. So in my mind, I was like, if I can get some sort of like small scholarships here and there, and then I was going to have to get loans for the rest of it. Um, so, and I don't remember the exact like cost of it at the time. I'm sure it's a lot more expensive now, but um, I think like UIC like was I want to say like 20 grand or 25 grand a semester or something, or a year or something like that. And IIT was like close to 40. Like it was a significant amount that was more than UIC. So in my mind, I was like, I'm gonna go to UIC, and that is what it is. And then I did apply to a couple of them, and then I got a an offer or like an acceptance letter from IIT, and I was like, wow, like I was flattered, right, that I got accepted there, but I was like, oh, there's no way I can afford it. And then another letter in the package that I got was like an offer. They were offering me what they called a transfer scholarship. I didn't know that this was a thing. Like I didn't know that existed. And I don't think that was anything that I applied for. It was just like because I was transferring from a community college and I had like really good grades, etc. They were going to offer me um, a scholarship that basically covered half of the tuition. So I was like, dang, like, it's probably, like, even with this scholarship, like, it's probably around the same amount that I would pay if I went to UIC. I was like, and in my eyes, at least, I was like, I think IIT is a little bit more prestigious of an architecture program than UIC. Sorry to any UIC grads out there. Um, but yeah, well, I'm talking about architecture specifically. But so I ended up taking it, and I ended up accepting and just fully actually applying to IIT. And yeah, and then obviously the rest of it, like I ended up doing. I was working, so I was able to pay for some of it, like each semester. But I did end up still having to get some student loans, which whatever. It's not the end of the world. A lot of people do it that way, and I know a lot of people that owe a lot more in student loans than I do. So, uh, but yeah, that's kind of how I got to IIT.
When you realized that you were going to take on those loans, I think a lot of people have a hard time, reconciling like I'm going to take on debt to go to school.
Hmm.
How were you able to convince yourself? Did you sort of, because you like math, did you reverse engineer it maybe and go, hey, I know what the end state looks like in terms of salaries for architects, and it's worthwhile to do so? Or how did you come up with that decision? Because I think that's a big
For
decision.
sure. No, that's a good question. Yeah, I did think about it, but I probably didn't think about it as much as I should have. Like to this day, like I don't know a lot about like I'm not like a financial person. Like you two guys probably are. I know you guys are. But like for me, it was like, you know what? I already screwed up once by like not going to college straight from high school, right? And I was like, I know that this is something that I should have done. So now like this is what I've got to do, right? So it was kind of like this is what you get for not possibly getting maybe a full ride scholarship straight out of high school. So in my mind, I was like, I'm gonna do that, like whatever. And another it's the average person when they buy a house, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like you take out a mortgage, like how many people can actually pay for a house cash? Like at least not a lot of people that I know, right? So I was like, this is just kind of a part of it, right? And again, for someone like me who I didn't have like like a trust fund or a bunch of like money saved up for anything, I was like, this is just how people like me kind of got to get stuff done, right? Like this is the only way that I can get to where I want to get right now. Um, so that's just kind of the way that I saw it. Um, and yeah, and I mean, like I said, I didn't know a lot of people that had gone to school, but one of my uncles, one of my mom's brothers at the time, and one of her sisters had, they got like law degrees. So, and I know that they had um, student loans even like well into their career. So I was like, I think it's just a part of it, and it is what it is. And yeah, like you said, like I know that in the long run, eventually, it'll pay off. It was that or keep working at CVS Pharmacy at the time.
So when you left Wright College, you already knew that you wanted to become an architect. So like going into this, applying for these colleges, did you have in mind like, hey, no matter what happens here, I got to go to a college. I'm going to finish this and become an architect, or did you just that was just the next step and that's what you were just taking it year by year? Like how did you plan that out?
No, so when I was at Wright, the first few years, it was, yeah, that was kind of the mindset. Like, let me do this and see what comes out of it. Like, let me see if I'm actually built for this and what the realistic possibilities actually are. And actually, now that I think about it, I didn't just finish like do the full 2.5 years of Wright College and then go straight into a university. I actually did like a year and a half at Wright College, and then I got married, right? So it was like I was like 22 years old, and me and my wife got married. And the reason why we did it so young was because we both knew that we kind of wanted to do something in terms of going to school and doing something. And her situation was similar to mine, right? Where she didn't like her parents had never really thought about her going to school, and she had no money, like they hadn't saved up any money for her to go to school or anything like that. So for a few other reasons, but primarily school, and getting our careers being one of them, we were like, you know what, um, let's just let's get married now as opposed to years down the road, and let's help each other out. Again, that was also like a huge gamble, right? Like getting married at 22 years old and like not knowing what was going to happen. um, but we did that. We got married, and so what we did first was we said, all right, one of us is going to go to school first, and the other one's going to like hold it down, right? And help put that first one through school. So we decided that she was going to go to school first. She went to nursing school. So she did college first. And at the time, I mean, at this point I had gone through like a bunch of like small jobs. But then at the time I was like, all right, I need to get a full-time job where I can actually make some decent money while my wife is in school. And that's when I ended up at AT&T, which is where I met Dan. Dan was my store manager at AT&T, um, and that was fun times, right, Dan?
Yeah, yeah, good times.
So I worked there for a couple years, while my wife was in school. And I mean, those commission checks came in and helped out a lot. Some months better than others, but yeah, like that, just getting like a good full-time job was important at the time. So it was kind of like I took a break from community college. So there like I took a couple breaks throughout the process. So I think that's why like my story is good for a lot of people who think that it's not possible, in the sense that like it's not cookie cutter for everyone. Like it wasn't that for me at all, right? So there's ways to do it, and like obviously consistency and just persistence, like it's super key, right? Like because I could have easily during those breaks been like, all right, screw this, especially when I was working at AT&T. Like that was more money than I had ever made in my life, right? Like so that could have easily been like, oh, you know what, like I'm good with this. But and it was fun, it was a fun job, we had a fun store. But yeah, I mean, my wife finished school, and then when she finished, she got her nursing degree, started working as a nurse, and then it was like, all right, my turn. So I ended up going back to Wright, and I think I did like 1 semester or 2 semesters to kind of finish up like my associate's degree there. And then that's when I was able to do that transfer to IIT. Um, but sorry, Dan, was that kind of what you had asked something else, hadn't you?
That
Okay.
sounds about
Okay.
right what I was looking for. Just more so wanted to see how you transitioned and kind of figured out how you're going to do it. But makes sense. You made that decision together, and as a team, you guys both accomplished two great careers. So
Yeah, and
it's really
I
interesting.
Yeah, I think that that's like really great advice for people in a couple situation, because I've never heard that where it's like we're just gonna take turns, we're gonna support each other like that. What a healthy relationship,
yeah, right.
to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, luckily, we're still here. We're still going strong, like 2 kids later. And yeah, who knows, man? Like we hadn't thought about it that way, but it's like you're right. Like we did the hard part. Like that was the hard part, right? Like now, like nothing else has been as difficult. And like I mean, it was a process. Like it was again, it was probably like 2 or 3 years of her being, or sorry, no, 4 years of her being in school, 3 or 4 years, and then I went to school. So it was a while. Like when I graduated um college, like when I graduated with my architecture degree, I was already, what, 27 years old? No, I'm lying. I was like 28, 29, something like that. late 20s, right? Where like a lot of the kids that I was graduating with were 22, you know. Um, but I wasn't the only one. There were a few other of my, my classmates that were my age, some a little older too. So, um, yeah, like a lot of people. I wasn't the only one. You know, a lot of people went later on to school. I graduated when I graduated at 28 or whatever. I graduated with a guy who was 42. He had been a carpenter for like most of his adult life, and he went to architecture school and did it. So so there are some crazy stories that I heard as well.
I'm actually there was a slight sense of regret when I first said that what a healthy
Hmm.
relationship because I was like, man, I really hope they were still together. Because if I had said that, and then you're like, oh well, that was
Yeah.
like that didn't work
But
out.
like, oh,
Really
let's
didn't.
let's start this over.
So I'm glad. Yeah, yeah. Let me reframe that. And yeah, so I'm really glad that that's what happened, and I'm glad you guys are still together. So once you graduated, like, what was it like then? Did you immediately get a job as an architect, or how did that play out
Yeah.
afterwards?
So when I was in at IIT, I applied for a few internships. Um, I should have done it sooner, to be honest with you, but I only interned at a firm my final year of architecture school. So for a year, I interned, and then that summer after graduate, no, I'm lying. Yeah, it was for about a year. For about that last year of architecture school, I interned, and when I graduated, they ended up offering me a full-time position, which I took, um, and I was there for about a year before I made a move to the firm that I'm with now. Yeah.
So I don't know anything about architecture. Are there different fields within architecture, or is it just a broad stroke like, hey, I'm an architect, I didn't do every aspect of art being an
Yeah,
architect?
that's a really good question, a loaded question. I'll try to answer it as be as concise as possible. But um, yeah, there's definitely different or different sizes and different like flavors of architecture firms, right? So first of all, I mean, it's like, architecture is just part of a bigger industry, which is like the construction industry, right? Um, and the real estate, the developer, like the development, real estate development industry, which goes hand in hand, like architecture goes hand in hand with engineering, civil engineering, structural engineering, mechanical engineering, stuff like that. And of course, you need people to to want to build stuff, right? So a lot of times, if it's like a private company, or a development, uh, a residential developer, or a commercial developer, whatever, just any type of developers. Um, but within architecture itself, yeah, it depends on the firm that you go to, right? Like there's a lot of firms that um, have specific uh, client and project types. Like the first firm that I worked at, they made their bread and butter, like, or their bread and butter was industrial projects. So they did a lot of um, like food processing plants, and just like industrial buildings of all types. They did other stuff, but that was like their bread and butter. Um, and then there's, firms that may be strictly residential, like they focus on, single family homes. And, there's firms again that just they'll pick like one thing that they're really good at, and they kind of stick to that. The firm that I'm at now, it's definitely way more variety. We do a lot of uh, multi-family residential projects, like big apartment buildings, apartment complexes. We do a lot of commercial work. We do a lot of just like interior build outs, or, renovations of existing buildings that, uh, a company may purchased to become their new like corporate headquarters. So we do a lot of interior stuff. Um, so we do a little bit of everything. We do, work on schools, a lot of country clubs. So it's really like a really wide variety, which is nice because it never gets boring and you're never stuck just working on the same thing. Um, like I have a friend who works at a firm and they do like a bunch of Wendy's. So like he's like, dude, I've designed like 25 Wendy's. And I'm like, yeah, that can get a little boring, right? So, and nothing against Wendy's. But I was like, I wouldn't want to just be building the same thing for the same client all the time. So yeah, it's definitely like different. And even within that, there's different, there's definitely like different roles that you could play in. Um, and this is actually a really good topic for those people that may be watching that are actually interested in architecture, but they don't know exactly what it's about, right? So, you could play a lot of different roles. Like there's a lot of, just to give you an example, like in my firm, or the firm that I work at, it's not my firm. There's a lot of people who, are very technical minded people, very technically oriented people that handle like the very technical detailing of a building, and then there's design oriented people, which is like what I do, in which we come up with the conceptual ideas. Like when we if a client comes to us and says, I want apartment building with 150 units and I want retail at the ground level, so it's like a mixed use building and this is the property that I have. um, they hand it to us, and then typically, like, again, this is specific to my role, or where I work, but as part of the design team, we're some of the first people to touch it. And we start from like a planning phase, right? Like we've got to plan, this is the amount of land that we have. And then of course there's, zoning and code, and zoning ordinances that go into that specific site, depending on where it is. And this is all stuff you got to do a little bit of research on online. Um, but it's like, okay, we can build this big of a footprint, we can go up this many levels. So, we tell the client, this is what you're. So again, first it's all planning, right? You're just looking at plans before you even look at this building or start designing in 3D. So a lot of it is just make sure it can work, that it works for the client, and that it just makes sense for everyone to move forward. So that the planning phase is really like the initial part of it. Again, for me, and then once the client gives you the okay, then you kind of start designing this actual thing. Like, what's it going to look like, right? Like, we already know it's going to fit this many units and we're going to have this many retail tenants in plan, but like, now let's design it. Like, what does this look like in 3D? What does it look like within its context, of the specific site? So that's what I do. Like, I come up with the design of what this thing could look like, which to me is the fun part, because it's yeah, I have this kind of like back and forth with some of the more technical people in the firm. They're like, "Oh, the fun part is the technical side of it," but to me, it's the designing, right? Because that's where I get to be creative, um, and it's more of like again, going back to what I did as a kid, which was drawing and being creative and putting ideas on paper. Um, and it so in a nutshell, I mean, once that design is kind of flushed out, and the city or the village that you're working in approves the design and the client is happy with the design, then it moves into like the different phases of the project, like making the project more real. um, so now they've got to start drawing, like all the technical drawings, the actual floor plans that specify the wall assemblies and stuff like that, and the floor assemblies and how the building actually gets constructed and put together. Like that all has to be drawn. And it goes through phases, right? It goes through design development, eventually through the construction. You got to make the construction set that the contractor is going to use to build this thing. um, and then even during construction, like the architects aren't done. Like you constantly have to do um, like it's a constant back and forth, because even when they're on the site, if there's something that's unclear or something that wasn't resolved or thought about, they can come back and say, hey, we're trying to build this, how should we go about it? So there's always constant communication really until the building is done. um, and again, like when it goes into that technical stuff, I mean, it goes like into the nitty gritty, like like drawing details for how you know, a window gets built into the wall and what the flashing is going to look like. So it's very technical stuff, and there's a lot of like, um, it's a lot. Like there's a lot of coordination too, and as the architect, you're kind of like the one that during the design process, um, you have to be like that coordinator that that kind of brings everyone together, right? Because while you're designing this thing, the structural engineer is doing his drawings to make sure that the structure, to hold this building up, is going to work, and how it's going to be built. While the mechanical engineer is doing his job and the electrical engineer is doing their job. So there's a lot of coordination um, that goes on throughout the entire process, of like, hey, you can't run your duct through here because we've got a piece of structure there. So then you're coordinating with the structural engineer and the mechanical engineer. So it's a lot, it's a lot of coordination. Like again, for me personally, like on a day to day, I don't deal a lot with that because I'm on the design side of it, which is what I always wanted to do. I didn't start as a designer. I started doing more of like the technical stuff. Um, and luckily, I was after voicing my opinion and kind of like proving myself, I kind of moved into the role of a designer.
Could you describe a little bit about what the difference is in technical versus the design? And then also, everyone that you just mentioned,
Hmm.
mechanical engineer to structural engineer, are they all inside the architect firm or are they external and you have to,
Yeah, yeah,
play
it's a good
telephone
question.
almost
Yeah,
with
so
everyone?
again, going for the conceptual like designer to the more technical, like specifically, like I mentioned, for the designer, it's like, what is this thing going to look like, right? Like, um, you know, is it going to be something modern? Is it going to be something more traditional? This wall's going to be brick, and this one's going to be, siding or whatever it may be. And you kind of it's a puzzle, right? Like designing this thing and making sure um, that overall everything works in terms of what it's going to look like, right? Like technical people, the technical people like to say that we come up with a pretty picture. Um, and for us designers, it's a little offensive. It's like, it's not just a pretty picture, dude. Like, this is what's going to sell the project, right? This is the design. The design has to be good because the client has to say, "Oh yeah, I like that design. I want to build that." And at the same time, like the city or village that you're designing in, like they have to approve it. They have to approve that the look of this building, that they like the appearance of the building, um, in order for them to even approve it and you to be able to move on and actually build the thing. So, but yes, at the end of the day, of like, as a designer, at the end of the day, you kind of have to come up with the overall planning, the elevations, like what is this building going to look like on all four sides or however many sides it has. And then typically, there's like the renderings, which is what people call the pretty picture, right? But again, it's like, to me, it's important because, um, like I always tell the technical people, like, if it wasn't for designers designing these cool looking buildings and getting approved by the city and the client, like you guys would have nothing to do construction documents on, right? um so it's just a lot of friendly like back and forth, but yeah, then like I said, once the project gets approved, then they take it and yeah, they do some heavy lifting, right? Like they do the technical drawings of like putting together like those blueprints. People know them as blueprints, but like construction documents, like the big plotted sets that eventually end up going to the city for approval, and that the contractors use to build it. So they don't draw a lot of like, they definitely don't do renderings. They'll do more of like all the legal drawing documents that are going to be used to build this thing. So it's a little bit about that. And what was the second part of your question, sir?
Yeah, the second part was just the team, structural engineer and also mechanical engineer. Are they part of the architectural firm, or when, like a client, let's say the city comes in and wants to build something, do they just go through several different firms and then make you guys coordinate with
Yeah,
each other?
so it depends. Like the first firm that I worked at, it was like they had everything in house. So there was an architecture department, there was a structural engineering department, There was an MEP, which is, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. They had that department. So they had architects and engineers in-house, uh, which was nice because it's like if you needed a question for some of them, you can just all meet in one place at any given time of the day and, hash things out. Where like the firm that I work at now, it's strictly an architecture firm. So yeah, so all of these other um, uh, you know, subcontractors, and or just like consultants and engineers and stuff. It's all external. Um, Sometimes the client, if a client comes to us to design the building, sometimes they'll have people that they want to work with from like an engineering side. And so, they'll connect us. Or sometimes the client just hires us, and then it's up to us on who we want to hire to be our structural engineer, electrical engineer, mechanical, etc.
When it came to the drawings now compared to when you were doing it as a kid, you were probably doing it by hand. Are you still drawing by hand for your architectural job, or is there software and stuff now that you have to rely
Yeah.
on?
hmm
And then a follow up question to that is: do you have to know like every single type of window and every single type of like flooring and every single, because you're the one drawing it? So I'm just curious, like, do you have to know the specs of like most common, you know, I
Materials.
guess I don't even know
Yeah,
what
yeah.
those are called, accoutrements,
Yeah, so for the
materials.
first question, yeah, so nowadays it's definitely more of like a digital thing, right? So I would say 90% of the people that work in architecture, are working with computers now. But there's still a very big part of architecture that still requires like hand drawing. And it's not like you're never going to draw like a final document by hand. But I mean, like, I would say more than drawing, it's like sketching. We do a lot of sketching, and it's really important because, that's usually how ideas start. Is like you literally grab a piece of trace paper and, a marker, a pen, and you just start sketching ideas out. And that's usually how the ideas initially get developed, right? Once you kind of feel like you've landed on something that's um, that you think is a good idea or that your team thinks is a good idea, then usually that's when we move into, start to modeling this thing, in 3D, um, using computer software. Um, but it's a constant back and forth, even for example, let's say I eventually start modeling a building in 3D on the computer, and I've got to change something because as part of the design in architecture, like you never end up with the first thing you draw, right? Like that's never the end product. It's a very iterative process in which you come up with ideas and you develop and develop, and then it may be a few weeks and then it's like, nope, this has to change, so you scrap the whole thing and you start over. So you've got to have like like short-term memory in a way, like not fall in love with any given design because you never know when it's going to change, right? So um so yeah, like the sketching, the hand drawing, it just comes in and out as part of it, but it's still definitely something that we do regularly. But the end product, the final product, is usually always going to be computer generated. um and then your question about, do you have to know the specs for everything? It definitely helps, right? Like you've got these resources, like we have people that we can reach out to for windows, like window manufacturers, because you make connections, right? Networking is huge, huge, huge. I'm sure for any career, but um, in architecture, it's no different. Like you make connections, you network, and it's important, right? Because we may have for example, like lighting, the firm that I work at, we work with different lighting consultants. So like when we're working on, providing the lighting for stuff, we may have an idea, but like the lighting people, the lighting consultants are the ones that, like, that's what they do, right? So they're the experts on it. So they'll tell you, you can use this light fixture, or this won't be enough light, or you need more light fixtures, etc. Um, so I may have an idea of like the overall look that I want for, so let's say a light fixture or the flooring that I'm putting in any given space or the brick that I want to use on the outside of the building. Um, but we have manufacturers or, just suppliers for all of these things. So, yeah, it's still, um, you just kind of establish connections, but you also learn, right? You with the years of experience, um, like I'm nowhere near close to that yet, but like I've only been practicing since I got out of school. I've only been practicing architecture for like a little over 5 years now. Um, but of course, like the project managers that I work with, like, they can tell you, oh, such and such window manufacturer has a window of this material and they can make this style of window and the maximum size is this. Like they just know that stuff off the top of their head because it comes with experience. Um, but yeah, it's not like you have to know everything off the top of your head. Like, your boss won't come up to you and say, quick, what's the biggest size you can get this window? Like, no, that's not how it works. But it does help, right? And at the very least, to have an idea. Or for example, it's also, um, let's say I'm designing something and I'm going to use a gray brick. Um, I in my mind, or even when I do the rendering, I may pick a random color of gray, but then eventually you've got to choose an actual brick, right? Like an actual color. So at that point, we'll reach out to like our brick rep, and say, hey, I'm thinking of using such and such color brick for this project, and typically we'll send them like the drawings or the rendering and say, send me a few samples. So they'll send you samples of bricks, that are close to what you're looking for. And then, you always need a physical sample to make like your final selection. So things like that. So, I mean, yeah, like I said before, it's a lot of back and forth, a lot of coordinating, um, with a lot of different people to make it happen. So, when you see a construction, site, a building going up, it's not just the guys that are there building the thing, right? Like there's a lot of people, um, in the background that we don't see that have done a lot of work, a lot of coordination. So, it's a lot. I mean, I give it to like the project managers at, let's say, for example, at my firm that lead a project, and they're the ones coordinating everything between everyone. And at the end of the day, it's on them to make sure everything's getting done. It's a lot. So there's a lot of different things you could do within an architecture firm. There's a lot of different roles that you can play, as part of your team, and there's just a lot of things you could do within the industry, as a whole.
Could you kind of just quickly walk through what are some examples of roles that you could have inside of a architecture firm and within that architecture
Yeah, of
industry
course.
or profession?
So, typically when you're fresh out of school and you're at the bottom of the totem pole, right? So it's what typically you're going to be called like an architectural associate or a architectural designer or something like that. And essentially you're just there to, you got to start somewhere, right? So you have to start learning the ropes and how architecture actually works. And you're not going to be leading any project or effort on your own. You're always going to be under the guidance of someone, um, that's just helping you, directing you, guiding you, but at the same time, you're learning. So, you know fresh out of school, you're going to be doing all types of stuff. Sometimes they just might want you to start drawing a floor plan or start drawing like a window section detail or whatever the case may be. Wherever your help is needed, that's what you're going to be helping with, right? Um, and then, yeah, again, depending on the structure of the firm, you can you can go into like more of the design side of things, like I said, which is like what I do now. You could eventually strive to become a project architect, which is, the person kind of in charge of, taking this project throughout its different phases of design, from doing the construction documents and getting this thing permitted and stuff. The project architect is usually the one that leads the team, putting the set together. And again, with like the younger people kind of, forming part of that team. And then above that is, like project managers, which are the ones that they're not so much like in the model day to day drawing and building everything. They're more like the ones running the show, right? Like I said, coordinating with the engineers and coordinating with different consultants. Again, project architects and designers like myself do that as well. But project managers are kind of the ones that, kind of pull the whole team together, and say, okay, they run the show, right? Like they're the head coach. So um, and yeah, and then of course above that, then you've got the partners who, maybe aren't so much involved with specific projects on a day to day, but they're more out there like making connections and meeting clients and bringing projects in, right? Um, so they're more like public facing, and they're the ones bringing in projects for us to be able to work on. And yeah, depending on the firm, there might be more specific, but more specific roles, but those are kind of like the big ones, I would say.
Yeah, just curious before we get into recommendations
Hmm.
for people who are
Hmm.
curious about joining the profession. Um, Career path wise, is there a way, like how does it look? Is there a pathway from where you're at as a design architect all the way to the partner? Is there kind of a path inside of that firm that leads you to it? Like many law firms have those types of things. Private equity firms, they usually have some sort of path that and you is it the same inside of an architecture firm? And then by then you probably have to grow out your network
Yeah.
because you're bringing in business, right? Or can you start bringing
I
in
mean, I
business
could,
at
right?
this
Like if
point
I
in your
knew,
career?
if I personally knew a developer or a client who needed a project and they found out that I work in an architecture firm, they might say, hey, I'd be interested in doing business with you guys. I mean, I wouldn't be the one maybe leading it, right? Like leading the effort of making everything work out, hashing out all the details, but I can definitely bring that opportunity to like the higher ups at the firm and say, hey, I know this person who's interested in possibly doing something, and just at least make the introduction, right? Um, but yeah, like me on a regular day, like I'm not the one going out there to, meeting with potential clients or anything. Um, but yeah, I think you can work your way up, and I don't think there's like, any like specific paths to become a partner or anything. Like, there's the lead designer in my firm, so like my direct boss, she's also a partner, and she started as just an associate as well. So actually I think she started as like a project architect doing more technical stuff, and then shifted to the design side of it, became the design director, and then eventually, is also now a partner. So it just depends on the structure of any given firm, and I guess whatever opportunity, um, you're given there.
Yeah, that makes sense. What recommendations do you have for someone who might be interested in going into architecture? Also, just curious if there's like personality types that work best as well for this, because you liked
Yeah.
drafting ever since you were little. So I'm curious what recommendations you have, like the best path there, and then maybe even what types of
Yeah, I
personalities
mean, in terms
fit.
of personalities, I don't think that there's a like a given like prototype of a person or personality. Like I've met a lot of different people that work in these fields, like from the most serious and shy person, quiet person, to the most like loud, and very expressive person, animated person. So I don't think that there's um like a you know definitely not like a stereotype of any sort. There's all types of people that work in this field. Um, and sorry, I keep forgetting the second parts of your question. What was the other?
Like what is a direct path, or yeah, what are ways that you can get to become an architect? Like, are there
Oh, yeah.
certifications, degrees?
Yeah, that's a
What
good
do you
question.
need? Do
Yeah,
you even need
so
a degree?
to become an architect, you definitely need at the very least your bachelor's degree. Your bachelor's degree, in architecture. And some people go on to get their master's degrees. To practice architecture, it's not required to have your master's. A lot of people just do it for personal reasons, personal accomplishments or something. Um, Also, some people, well, it depends on the school, because some schools offer programs like even if you get your bachelor's, like it's not an accredited bachelor's degree, which means they still also have to get their master's. Um, so like at IIT, they're an accredited like bachelor's uh, degree in architecture. So you only have to do, but it's a 5-year program versus a 4-year program. So a lot of schools are like 4 years of bachelor and 2 years of master's, where in order to, to get to that point, or like I said, at, an accredited school like IIT, you could do like a 5-year program, bachelor's degree. And then there's also licensure, right? Like you've got to get licensed to actually like sign or stamp your drawings with your name and your signature. Like me personally, I'm not licensed yet. I've kind of been putting it off. There's to become licensed, you need a certain amount of hours of like experience hours that you kind of track through this website. Um, you enter the hours that you've worked, and you usually have to like show proof of that, or you get like a mentor from a firm, the firm that you work at, and they are like your mentor for your hours, and they kind of sign off on it. And then here in Illinois, each state has its own licensure path, but in Illinois you've got to take 6 exams in total to get your license. Um, and then once you complete the hours and take your 6 exams, then you're like an officially licensed architect. Um, I've only taken one exam, so I have 5 to go. Um,
How long does it take, and what are the benefits of a license if you can already
yeah,
practice in a
so
way, right? You're
um,
already drawing. Like,
for a lot of people,
what are the
um,
benefits for?
I mean, I think everyone deep inside, like it's like a personal, like goal. Like you want to be licensed, right? You want to finish it off. Um, but yeah, for example, like at the firm that I work at, like I don't sign any drawings to send to the city, right? Like that's, like the partners, the higher ups, they're the ones who stamp all the drawings, sign the drawings, and send it into the city, right? So like I don't have to worry about that right now. I can be part of the team and work and do my thing. I just don't sign them. So don't sign the drawings. Don't stamp them off. I don't have a stamp. But uh, I guess the reason why you would need it is like, let's say you kind of like if I ever wanted to start my own practice, my own firm, then more than likely I would need that unless I hired people that would be the ones to stamp the drawings and stuff. But I mean, I think most people that I know that are, that run their own practice are licensed. So, um, I definitely want to do it. And, there's always that little pressure from everyone at work, like, oh, go get your license. Um, but yeah, like I know people that are older, much older than me that don't have their license. I know people that as soon as they graduate and start working, like they just make it a goal to get their license as soon as possible. And that's probably the best thing to do. Just kind of like knock it out and get it out of the way. Um, but I mean, I didn't do that. And yeah, like I said, it's a little daunting to get it because it's 6 exams. Each exam, I mean, you're there for like 3 to 4 hours for one exam. Like it's a long exam. Like each one is long. Um, each one requires the suggested amount of like study time for each exam is like 200 hours. Like it's pretty intense. Um, so like I said, I've taken one exam. I passed it on my first try, which was good. Um, so yeah, I think I've got it. I think when I sign up for the rest, I'm gonna try to do them as close as possible, like away from each other and just knock them out. Like give myself, 2 months and knock them out during that time. Um, but but yeah, so licensure is, probably like the last official certification. Um, and then, people there are other certifications that people get like specific to different things, like LEED, which is like the sustainability uh, part of it. Some people get certified for LEED, stuff like that. So there's other certifications that you get along the way, but the big ones are obviously your bachelor's degree at the very least to be able to work at an architecture firm, and then your license is kind of like the big prize.
What would you say makes like the best architects that you've seen? Obviously, you've got to be willing to take all these
Yeah.
tests and go through all these certifications and be committed, right? But like, what do you see that makes the architects that
Um,
you work with the best?
all right. I think the big thing, like from a just like a general broad perspective. This sounds a little cliche, but I think it's true of any profession. Like you've got to have a genuine passion for it, like a true passion for it, because a lot of times I hear people say,
Yeah.
especially like in high school or even in college, like, oh, I want to do this because I want to make X amount of money, and this profession is going to get me there. Um, Very few people that I know that have had that philosophy have actually gone on to have like an enjoyable career. Either one, they hate their career, or they change. So that that's number one, right? Like you've really got to enjoy what you do. Like I've worked with people that, let's say, they graduate from school, they start working with us, and then a year. I mean, it's happened. Like even at this firm, it's happened at least twice, where guy graduates school, starts working with us. A year later, he was like, you know what, this isn't for me. And it's like at this point, like you're done with your degree, right? You've went to school for at least 4 or 5 years. You've been working for a year, and now you decide that architecture is not for you. Like, and you know, I don't know, right? Maybe he did architecture because he thought he would make X amount of money, or because he expected something else. And I think, Eric, the questions that you've been asking are questions that I get asked a lot, right? As someone who may not know about architecture or how it works or what it means or what roles or what goes into it. I think that's a big mistake that a lot of people do, not just with specific to architecture, but just in general, right? Like they think they know what a profession is, so they study that without actually digging in. And I think the best way to do that is to talk to people who do it, right? Because you could talk to your counselor at school to say, hey, I'm thinking about this degree. And yeah, they can point you in the direction of the school, of what schools you should apply to, but they can't tell you the information that you're going to want to know because they don't practice that profession. And you may do research, but for nowadays, sadly, research means like Googling something, right? And you could find all types of stuff. And a lot of times it barely scratches the surface. So I think really understanding what goes into doing any given profession, I think that's key, um, because otherwise you're either going to hate it, um, or if you get lucky, you might be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is kind of what I thought it was going to be. Um, but I think to make a good architect, I think it's that, like you have to be passionate about it and do it because you like to do that. And you may not be passionate about everything in architecture. Like again, I'm not passionate about like doing, like code research and like zone, like all that, just or calculating how many toilets we're going to need in a building. Like it's stuff that we've got to do, or like life safety stuff, like you got to calculate, um, or you got to calculate the fire rating of a wall. Like that to me is not fun. Like that's more what like the technical people do. Um, but I think as long as you know what you want to do in architecture, um, and you work your way to get to that point, um, then I think you can become a good architect. And then, of course, you've just got to try, right? It's like you can be passionate about something and say that you like it, but if you don't give it your all, like you're not going to be good. If you're not dependable, if you're not reliable, if you're not on top of your stuff, and you know, you don't complete your work to meet a deadline, like you're probably not very good at what you're doing, right? Um, so yeah, like again, it sounds simple and it's probably like oversimplified, but yeah, you have to like it and you have to work hard at it. There's nights where you may be up working all evening, that happens like on deadline days where you've got to submit something to either the client or the city or whatever. Like, you may be working until midnight, or, it's not. not doesn't happen often, at least not for me. Um, but you've got to know that that's going to happen, right? So I think just liking it and actually just trying and again, it sounds super easy and simple, but yeah, it's not much to it. You have to like it and you have to work hard at it. Oh, sorry, real quick. And another one is you have to have good communication skills. If you're not good at communicating or you don't like talking to people, that's going to be a problem because as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of coordination and a lot of back and forth that happens. Um, so that's really important. Being comfortable with communicating with others and collaborating. I think if I had to like pick one word to describe architecture, it's collaboration. Like it's collaborative, and you can't do anything by yourself. So if you're not good at communicating your ideas or speaking up about things, then you're probably not going to be very good at it.
Yeah. It sounds like, you said they should have a passion for architecture. Like, um, I mean, given the amount of time it
Mhm.
takes to get the degree and then the licensing, um, is this something that you
Mhm.
earlier talked about a carpenter who decided to go into architecture? How how is that process? Like, are there a lot of people who mid-career decide to transition over?
Yeah, so
And
like
is it a tough transition?
this specific friend that was a carpenter, I mean, I think it was a little bit of the same. He just kind of got tired of maybe doing what he was doing and said, I like building stuff, but now I want to be on the design side of it. So actually, his path was similar to mine from like getting the degree, because I actually first met him also at Wright College when we were doing community college. I met him there, um, and we both ended up transferring to IIT, um, and did it that way. So again, because for him, he was well past high school when he decided to go into architecture. He had to start from somewhere, right? So he took a similar route to me in saying, "No, I got to start with community college and work my way to an architecture, program at a university." So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that it happens a lot, um, like seeing people come into architecture very, or later in their career, and later into another career because it is tough. I mean, architecture school, there used to be like, I know back when I was in school, we looked this up one time, and it was like, one of the most time consuming and like uh, time consuming and like um, demanding programs of school was architecture because it requires a lot of time. Like it's not just like, you do your math homework and you're reading and you're done. It's like you've got to design stuff and you've got to build stuff and you've got to build models. And I mean, there were, I had more than my fair share of like all-nighters when I was in architecture school. So I think for someone who, let's say, is in their 30s or 40s, and let's say they've been working at another career, it probably doesn't make sense to them to say, hey, I'm going to go to architecture school for 4 years and be pulling all-nighters when I'm 40 years old. Like, it's not very common. So yeah, it doesn't happen often.
Yeah, that's good to know. It really does sound like a very rigorous process to get there.
That's true. It has to go through a lot of people to get approved. So yeah, I question like when buildings fail. I know, stuff happens, but when something fails and it was like, wow, that went through a lot of eyes and a lot of hands. Like how did I'm talking when it's like like it was specific to one part of the building that had a specific flaw, right? I'm like, how did so many people, have this in their hands and not catch this? But stuff happens.
Hmm. And then before we kind of close this all out, is there anything that's like last imparting advice that you can give? And it could be anything from architecture to just life in general, the way that you were brought up without anyone around you with a college degree, maybe you have insight on that side.
Yeah,
Whatever advice you'd
absolutely.
like to impart,
I
I'd love
think
to hear it.
I mean, the first thing, kind of going back to what I was saying about how, my story and how I started. I think the first thing, especially like for the younger audience that may be watching this, is like there's not always a clear path, and it doesn't always seem like doable, right? Like a lot of times it's like, oh yeah, like I know people, are architects. I know people are doctors, but I could never be that. Or like it's just not in the realm of possibility for some people for whatever reason, whether they think they're not smart enough, or whether they don't have the financial resources to do it, or whether it's just not something that's been around them, like it was in my case. Um, in my case, I feel like it was all of those, right? But I think just knowing that there's always a way, you know. I think you just have to know and be honest with yourself. Like, if this is something you want, you've got to find a way to do it, because there's gonna be a way to get there. Like, there's gotta be, like, there's always a way, right? Um, but I think you also have to go into it knowing that you're gonna have to grind, like you're gonna have to work for it, right? Like what you guys do. Like I tell Dan all the time, like when I see you guys flipping houses, I've been telling Dan for years, like, man, I want to do this. Like I want to flip a house. Like I want to get into that side of things. But I've never actually acted on it. Do you know what I mean? Like I can desire and wish and read about it as much as I can, but it's not until I say, you know what, I'm gonna put my foot in the ground and I'm gonna move forward and actually act on it. Like you can want to do something and have these dreams and goals for yourself, but and even if you believe in yourself, but if you don't act on it, like you're being unfair to yourself, because you're not allowing yourself to do it. You know what I mean? I think you just have to do it. You have to find a way, and you have to act on it. um, like my first step was actually signing up for community college. Like that was my first, and I was hesitant to do that, but I just did it, and then that just kind of got the ball rolling. And like I said, there were breaks here and there, but I think you just have to be persistent, um, and you have to be on top of it. I mean, you can't go into it and say, "Oh, I'm gonna sign up to go to school for, you know, X degree," and then just hope that it's a cakewalk. Or don't choose a career because you think it might be easy. That school might be easy. Don't do it because you think you're going to make a lot of money. Um, I think you have to choose something you're passionate about, and actually act on it. Um, because even if you think that it's hard for you, or you don't have a clear path to get there, um, there's going to be a way to do it. You just have to try.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, for anyone who's watching, if you're interested in learning more about architecture or just maybe career advice in general, and you want to contact Mario, you can reach us at info@mentoraccess.com, and we'll make sure to relay the message to Mario, and we'll make
I
sure you
will. I
get it,
will.
and he'll respond. At least I'm pretty sure he will. um, yeah. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time, Mario. This has been really insightful. Your story's actually really inspirational. The way that you took all these risks and then decided to make these, like, a really hard decision of a career path that requires such a rigorous process to get to at a later stage in life. And I think that that's
Thank
highly
you. No, of
commendable.
course.
So really appreciate
Yeah,
you
thank
sharing your
thank you
story.
guys for
Yeah,
having
thanks.
me. This was fun. It was cool, and I hope that even if it's just one person, right, that this helps and gives them that a little extra push, or gives them a little bit of insight to architecture specifically. I think it was all worthwhile, and I hope that that somebody finds it interesting and takes something from it.
Hey, thanks for joining us at Mentor Access. If you like what you just watched, please click like and subscribe, and also hit that bell so that you get notified when we have new videos come out. Thank you for supporting our mission.